Hello and how are you, Planeteers? My name is Blessing, the surname is Nkosi, and I am from Vaal University of Technology doing ecotourism management. And today on our talk, we will be talking about climate change. So, from the previous talks, we've talked about what makes the planet habitable. We've stripped the planet off and left it as a bare rock. And we discovered that it's not because of its distance from the sun that makes it habitable, but it is because of many components that come together to make it habitable. For an example, the static atmosphere, the circulating oceans, and many more components that we have described. So, from the most recent talk, we've been talking about human evolution. And now where we introduce human beings. Now let's look at how human beings affect the habitableness of the planet in relative to climate change. So we will talk about what is climate change, we will define climate change, and what are the effects it has on the environment, and why is South Africa a special place to address climate change, and how can we address the issue of climate change to make sure that there is better life on the planet. So, what is climate change? Climate change is not global warming, but climate change is the gradual change from the usual weather patterns of a particular region over a long period of time. Global warming is the overall warming of the planet based on average temperature of the entire surface of the planet. So basically, climate change is the gradual change, or it is the change from the usual weather patterns, or the change from the usual, let's say, temperature, wind speed, rainfall pattern. When that change either increasing or decreasing, we call it climate change in a long range of time. So in global warming, it is when the planet heats up, increase in temperatures. That's global warming. So, what causes this climate change? We have natural causes and human causes. From natural causes, we have wildfires. These wildfires, they increase the heat in the planet because when they burn, they cause extra heat to accumulate in the atmosphere. Then ocean currents, they affect the rainfall patterns, the weather patterns in the coastal areas. Volcanic eruptions, they release dust particles in the atmosphere. These dust particles, they reflect the radiation from the sun, and some they absorb the heat from the sun, which causes a variety or a change from the usual weather patterns, changing the Earth's orientation. This is also part of what affects climate change. And on the human causes, we have agriculture, where people remove carbon sinks like big trees and they insert small crops which absorb less carbon inside them. And deforestation, where people literally cut down trees, and this also reduces the number of carbon sinks. And land use change, where people change what the certain land is used for. So this also affects the change in the climate of that certain area or region. Burning of fossil fuel, this increase the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and as the amount of carbon in the atmosphere increase, also the temperatures of the globe they increase, which leads to global warming, which is also part of climate change. So what are greenhouse effects? We have greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases, these are layers in the atmosphere that envelops the planet. They protect the planet from harmful radiation from outer space coming in, and they also keep it warm within the planet. So what makes the planet to be warm, it's actually the greenhouse gases which keeps in the heat. We have water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and others. So what we're seeing here from step one, it is the sun giving out rays to the earth. It radiates light to the earth. And as this light is radiated to the earth, some radiation bounces back or reflects on clouds and dust particles, and some rays enters the earth. And as you can see here, it is absorbed by the ocean and reflected back to the atmosphere here to step number three. Why is it reflected? It is because ice is white in color, so it reflects back the radiation to out space. And here also water is also reflective. It also reflects the light rays out to space. And here the radiation which is absorbed, it is transferred to the land. And as it is transferred to the land also gets to heat up, and it also reflects it back to the atmosphere. So what we're noticing here is that as it is reflected here from the ocean to the atmosphere, more light rays exit the atmosphere. Why? Because this layer it's actually light grayish, which means it's thin, so it's able to radiate out into space, and less is reflected back into the planet. It is reflected by clouds, dust particles. So here, why is less radiation that is escaping to the space, and more radiation bouncing back to the planet? So what we're seeing here inside land is there is a factory, and this factory, it releases carbon into the atmosphere. It releases more gases into the atmosphere, and these gases toxicate the atmosphere, and they make a very thick layer in the atmosphere, which prevents the light rays to exit, which prevents the radiation from the sun to exit the planet. So this causes more heat to accumulate within the atmosphere, whereas on this side, more rays or more radiation goes out into space, and hence the temperatures here gets to be a bit cooler, and here gets to be very warm. So what does this mean? This means that human activities such as the industrialization and industries, they affect the climate change. So now what does this all mean? The extra heat trapped in the atmosphere is causing the temperatures to rise within the planet. And what we're seeing from this graph is on the y-axis on the right hand side, it is the temperatures. So these are the temperatures, and on the left hand side, what we're seeing is it is the concentration of carbon dioxide. And here on the x-axis, what we're seeing is the number of years from 1860 to 1915. So what we are observing here is on this thick line, we are having the carbon dioxide concentration. And on this line, which is going up and down, up and down, up and down, it is temperatures. So what we're observing is that as the amount of carbon dioxide increase, also the temperatures abound, and they are increasing also. This means that carbon dioxide has a direct effect on the temperatures increasing inside the planet. And so now, as these temperatures are increasing, there are effects that they have on the planet. So what are some of the global effects that they have? We have effects on the ocean. So as this heat causes the ice on the oceans to melt, this causes the sea levels to rise. And it's not the only thing that causes the sea level to rise. When water is heated, it expands, which is one of the major contribution to the rising of the sea level. And we end up having food insecurity, where people will have to starve because there is no food, because of the climate is not conducive to grow any food. We have healthy problems where people get sick because of, let's say, maybe increasing temperatures, which causes skin cancer and other diseases. And we have a direct effect on weather patterns. So how does this affect the weather? What we're seeing here is a graph that shows extreme events that have been happening in the world. So on the y-axis here, we are observing numbers of occurrence of extreme weather events, and on the x-axis here, we are observing a timeline from 1970 to 2005. And what we are observing on this graph is that all the number of floods, windstorm, droughts, and slides, they are all increasing. They are all increasing. This shows that as time is going, the number of extreme weather events are increasing, which means that climate change has a direct effect on the extreme weather events which are occurring. So what does this now mean for South Africa? It means that some of the problems that we're experiencing in South Africa, they're a direct effect of climate change. So as the increasing temperatures continues to increase, they cause the water sources which are already diminishing, they cause them to vanish, which causes water scarcity. And this water scarcity means that there will be no water for drinking, no water for watering. So this leads to food scarcity, and as it is food scarcity, we get health problems. So and now as we lose water, we get to lose our biodiversity, and which is one of the most important things in South Africa, as it is an attraction for foreign tourists, and which they bring foreign income, and which also causes the economy to grow. So as we lose this biodiversity, we get less tourists coming into the country, so we get less foreign income, which also affects our economic growth. And this also has a direct effect on the health problems, as people get diseases, and the increasing temperatures, we know that they lead to an increase or fasten the infestation of malaria. And so now, these are one of the most recent incidences where we observed the effects of climate change within South Africa. For instance, we had a drought in the Eastern Cape and a drought also in the Northern Cape. In the Cape Town, we even had to count down to day zero, which shows how serious the matter of climate change is. Now, and we have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, aka IPCC, which was established in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme. Its aim was to study climate change, look at the effects of climate change, and suggest possible ways or procedures where we can live sustainably. So, in one of their recent reports, they said that the temperatures must remain below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in order to achieve that, we must have a net zero carbon dioxide emission. So, what does net zero carbon dioxide emission means? It means that the amount of carbon that is released into the atmosphere is equal to the amount of carbon that is taken in by the carbon sinks. So no excess of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So now, how can we address climate change? As we've seen that it is a very big problem and a large issue on not just South Africa, but on the whole planet. So we have mitigation efforts and adaptation efforts. On the mitigation efforts is how we can reduce or prevent climate change effect on the environment. So we can either increase carbon sinks by planting trees, afforestation, or sustainable transportation. For an example, using a bicycle or finding a taxi, using the public transport like getting a bus. And on the adaptation method, it's how we adapt to the changes that climate change is bringing. We can either relocate from flooded areas that we know that they are vulnerable to floods, weatherproofing, making sure that our houses, they are strong enough to withstand storms. So these are one of the mitigations and adaptation methods that we can use. And now, as we are already facing this issue of climate change, how do we adapt to it? The president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, has introduced the carbon tax billing, which he signed earlier this year, where the primary objective of the bill is to reduce the greenhouse gas emission in a sustainable and cost-effective manner, where they say that companies are only allowed to release a certain amount of carbon into the atmosphere. If they exceed that limit, they have to pay extra for the carbon that they are releasing into the atmosphere. But then, is it really about being sustainable and being net zero carbon, or is it just about the money? I'll leave that question to you to answer or think about. So So, what did we learn today? We've learned that climate change is the change in the climatic condition or the weather conditions of a certain region in a long range of time. And global warming, it is the increase in temperature or increase in heat for the whole globe. We talked about greenhouse effects and how they cause the planet to heat up. And I described that without the greenhouse effect, the planet would actually be too cold and uninhabitable. So we talked about human activities which induce climate change, like burning fossil fuel, deforestation. We talked about global and local effects that climate change has on the environment and how SA is addressing climate change, the issue of carbon tax billing. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I hope you learned something and you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for the next awesome presentation.